Welcome all to another episode of After School. I'm Randall Carlson, and for many years I have been researching the ancient origins of many of our modern customs, holidays, and celebrations. One that has particularly intrigued me is the origin and observance of Halloween. Join me as we explore the profound and mysterious celebration that has roots in an ancient, universal tradition of catastrophe that caused a true global reset. So, without further ado, let's take a dive down this primordial rabbit hole. The ancient knowledge will again abound and overflow as water upon the earth. The remains of this knowledge are everywhere about us in everyday use and perfect. This is a quote from a book, one of the early books I ever read on the subject of Kabbalah and geometry and mystery religions. It was entitled The Source of Measure, written in 1875 by J. Ralston Skinner. And I think I read this book over 50 years ago, and this particular quote really stuck with me for multiple reasons. So as we go through this material, we may come back and revisit this quote and see more in it than we're seeing upon the initial reading. Old English proverb, fire and water have no mercy. And of course, we know from myths and legends from all around the planet that there were two primary ways that the world was periodically destroyed, and it involved flood and fire. In the Greek terminology, flood was cataclysmos, from where we get the word cataclysm, and the destruction of the world by fire was ekparousis, the root of that term being pyro, meaning fire. And in some versions of it, the periodic destructions of the world alternated between one of fire and one of flood. We know that looking at the actual record, the geological record, the biological record, other proxy records of past changes, that there have been times when both fire and flood were involved almost simultaneously. I cite as an example the Younger Dryas boundary, the lower Younger Dryas boundary, that has preserves evidence of gigantic floods and also evidence of gigantic fires. So from the Arthurian tradition, we find this quote from Merlin, the magician. "It is the doom of men that they forget." And so there are certain traditions that have been handed down, certain customs, certain ceremonies, certain observations that we take for granted that actually conceal a much deeper meaning than what is assumed in a typical secular context. So in this particular case, as an example, we'll look at Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, and we'll consider some of its origin stories. Now, before we do that, I'm going to give a quote from the popular press that refers to Halloween and I think completely misses the reality of it. Lessons from the Great Pumpkin. Great Pumpkin, of course, was from the Charlie Brown comic strip. And Linus, one of the characters in the Charlie Brown comic strip, believed that there was a great pumpkin similar to the Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, and this was an ongoing theme in many of the Charlie Brown or Peanuts classic comics. So this is from 2010 in the Parade, the Sunday magazine that was sent out with lots of Sunday newspapers back in the day when people were still mostly reading newspapers. It's called Lessons from the Great Pumpkin. The true genius of the Great Pumpkin may be the way it sends up other holiday parables by having a character seek deeper meaning in the sole holiday that has no real lesson to teach. Is there any other day we celebrate that is as empty of moral or historical significance? Halloween exists today simply so that kids can dress up, run around after dark, eat too much candy, and scare the pants off one another. So that's all there is to Halloween, at least according to popular conceptions. All right. On Halloween, when the festival of the dead commenced, quote, the spirits of the dead wander more than at any other time of the year. This is a night when devils, witches, and other mischief-making beings are all abroad on their baleful midnight errands. This is a 19th century commentary on Halloween. And this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1963 edition. I like to go back to some of the older encyclopedias sometime because they're not so politically correct. In its strictly religious aspect, this occasion is known as the Vigil of Hallowmass or All Saints' Day. November 1st, observed by the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches. In Great Britain, Ireland, and the United States, ancient Halloween folk customs persist alongside the ecclesiastical observance. The occasion shows clear connections with the religion of the Druids in pre-Christian Ireland and Scotland. The Celtic year ended on October 31st, the eve of Samhain, and was celebrated with both religious and agrarian rites. For the Druids, Samhain was both the end of summer and a festival of the dead. The spirits of the dead were believed to visit their kinsmen in search of warmth and good cheer as winter approached. It was also an occasion when fairies, witches, and goblins terrified the populace. Bonfires were lighted on hilltops on the eve of Samhain. The tendency to manipulate rather than to celebrate folk festivals such as Halloween is characteristic of the 20th century. It reflects the growing influence of a rational outlook on life and the loss of interest in imagination and fantasy. The secular character of contemporary culture is also reflected in public neglect of the religious significance of Halloween, as well as in progressive loss of its folk vitality. Children are least affected by this disenchantment, and consequently, the more important folk occasions tend to be dominated by the young. Now, this quote kind of was a foretaste of this growing influence of the rational outlook on life that we saw expressed through the previous quote, that essentially denied to Halloween any significance at all. And yet here it is. Anyone who takes even the most cursory look at it realizes that it has this connection with the 3-day religious festival of All Hallows Eve, All Saints, and All Souls Day. So let's go on here. Here's another old tradition. This is quoted from the history of Halloween that was on the History Channel maybe a decade ago or so. If you put your clothes on inside out and walk backwards on Halloween night, you will see a witch flying in the sky at midnight. People used to believe that witches were the devil. The Day of the Dead, a universal tradition. This is from the work of Robert Grant Halliburton, who was an interesting person, a scholar, a poet. Oh, what were his attainments? He was a researcher and wrote quite a bit. But anyways, let's see, this is what Wikipedia says about him. He was a Canadian lawyer and an anthropologist. He became famous after founding